Hello, everyone. I'm Dan, also known as DSpav on Roblox, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all to our Level Up Roundtable on Educational Games, featuring Zach, aka Boatbomber, Sigmund from Untamed Planet, and Colin from Filament Games. Aaron, please take it away.
Thank you, Dan. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Dan mentioned, today we are going to be talking about educational games. We are joined by three fabulous developers who are bringing educational experiences to Roblox. So let's start off with Zach, aka Boatbomber, developer of Lua Learning. Would you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Zach. Most of you know me as Boatbomber. I've been on Roblox since 2011, and I've been working on Lua Learning by myself since 2018. I've won 2 RDC Game Jams and a couple Bloxy Awards, including Most Educational Game in 2020 for Lua Learning. And I've been devoting all my efforts on the platform towards creating educational content, open source software, and development tooling to help more people be able to create games on Roblox.
Awesome. We are so glad to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. Sigmund, you're up next.
Yeah, I'm Sigmund, also known as Ravenshield on the platform, and I'm from Norway. I joined Roblox in 2007 and kind of just been toying with it ever since. And around 2016, I started doing more professional gigs and got some of the event contracts that Roblox did at the time, such as EggHunt 2017 and 18, 5th annual Bloxies, and the Ready Player One event, the first one. And in 2020, I was contacted by someone who wanted to create this game studio for nature, which is Untamed Planet, where I work now. And I kind of set out to create a nature game and a nature team with some basic funding. And it's been my life ever since, essentially.
Super. We will definitely be taking a closer look at Untamed Planet soon. All right. And Colin, how about you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Colin, or CollyPark, and I work for a company called Filament Games. I worked for them for 4 years as a game designer, and Filament has been around for 17 years. We've shipped over 200 projects, and we work for some organizations like Smithsonian, iCivics, Nat Geo. So we create all kinds of exciting educational and impact games. And right now, I'm working on a six-person team on a project called Roboco Sports League that we'll be talking about.
Cool. So you are a more recent kind of immigrant to Roblox. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Filament just started working on Roblox games actually last year. So definitely newer, but also very excited to be here.
Cool. We are excited to have you. So next, I'd like to just learn a little bit more about how you all got into game development.
Yeah, I can start. I joined Roblox in 2007, as I mentioned, and had played games before that. But what I really quickly realized was that I enjoyed facilitating and understanding the behind the scenes of everything more than actually playing. And Roblox allowed me to, open up my place and just add nukes and everything fun from the toolbox right into the game. And from there, it kind of grew into what became a passion for game development, and started to learn scripting probably like in 2008. And then, it's been a uphill or downhill or whatever you would say from there, of just constant learning and constant improvement.
Yeah, so I got started because my friends and I in 5th grade, we wanted to have like battle arenas custom made just for us where we could, battle out and test our skills against each other. So I would hop into Studio and just start placing free models and messing around. And I remember my favorite was this fighter jet that mostly worked, but it really just exploded constantly. And that was really cool to a, 12-year-old. And so from there, I found that like I really love the experience of creating things and getting to play them afterwards. And Roblox made that really easy and accessible. And so I kept doing it until it took me here.
Awesome.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, Colin.
Yeah, my path was a little bit different. My first professional job was as an instructional designer, which kind of has some of the same goals as educational game design. Sitting people down in front of a computer and having them learn things from that experience. But yeah, I did that for a few years and kind of realized that the things I was making were maybe not quite as engaging or effective as I thought they could be. So educational game design felt like a great next step. I discovered Filament and kind of started trying to get hired there.
Awesome. We have a very similar background.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. All right. So you all have very different experiences on the platform, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about those. So maybe starting with Sigmund. And Dan, I think we have some images to show. Could you tell us a little bit about your game, Sigmund?
Yeah, Untamed Planet, or soon to be rebranded Untamed Animals, because we're actually becoming a much bigger brand also off the platform. Is a game where you can play as humans or animals in beautiful environments inspired by real nature. Like the DNA for all our games and all our product is to take inspiration from nature. So everything we're doing is for nature, and we consider nature our biggest shareholder in the company, actually sharing 50% of our profits with nature that goes towards nature conservation around the world. And we're right now actually working on the biggest update probably to the game so far, where the focus shifts from being humans and animal role play game to be more of a nature ranger that rescues wild animals and trains them up and rewilds them into their natural biomes to kind of do the conservation work just gamified. And I'm super excited. So we have a small picture we can show here, just teasing that update. Yeah, so our fantastic team consisting of Jenny Bean, who's actually in the chat here today, and Matthew McLeod, or Snake McLeod, has been working on this with me since 6-7 weeks ago, kind of just shifting the focus of the game. So nature and animals are still very much the focus. Also, what you hear in the kind of rebranding of the game, going to Untamed Animals, it kind of all tries to tie it together into a more streamlined experience. So yeah, that's our game quickly summarized. Take care of animals.
Awesome. All right. I think that maybe Colin next, and we have an image for you as well. We have a video for you as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess we'll watch that first. Or should I talk over it, or should we just?
Yeah, you can talk over it.
Okay, there's no music. Okay. Yeah, so our game is called Robocore Sports League, and it's actually a spin-off of another IP that Filament is working on. But this is a robot building, robot engineering game. So you can see the players building a simple car out of blocks and DC motors and servo motors and pistons. And then you can take your robot that you built into these multiplayer challenges. A lot of them are kind of modeled after sports. So we had like a soccer match there. And yeah, so we have some shots of just players in the lobby building all kinds of crazy, amusing things, and yeah, kind of coexisting in this shared space together. And yeah, so we've just kind of got a few parts right now, but we're adding more every week and looking into doing more challenges too. So yeah, that's basically what we're working on.
Very cool. So yes, please, Zach, if you would also tell us a little bit about Lua Learning.
Sure. So Lua Learning is an interactive experience for, as the name suggests, learning Lua. Users can join the game and write code to complete lessons. As they learn, they get to use that knowledge to help solidify it and really help them build up their knowledge and tool base so that they can walk away feeling confident that they can use Lua right? It's about being interactive and not just a wall of text that you read and say, maybe I understood this. Because as you go through and write code and add and accumulate knowledge, you get a lot of confidence in yourself. And it has another section in it where users can submit tutorials. So there's hundreds of community submitted tutorials for you to read. So once you finish the lessons, you can move on to the tutorials that go over a lot more specific concepts, like how to create a leaderboard or how to do certain things for your game that may not be covered by just directly programming, but how to apply that. And we have a fantastic community with some really great tutorials up there.
Awesome. So very cool, very different experiences. Zach, Colin, you're kind of leaning more into STEAM, kind of technical sort of skills and knowledge. And Sigmund, yours is very nature oriented and sounds almost like persuasive, trying to maybe change people's behavior and raise awareness. And yet these are all educational experiences. So I'm curious on how would you define an educational experience?
Yeah, for me, it's been less about strictly learning something new, but to grow as a person in any way or shape, and that the game makes you walk away with something. So, for example, in our game, it's not so much about feeding you facts about nature and animals, but it's about intriguing your curiosity for nature and hopefully sparking like an interest or passion for wanting to explore the real nature when you see the awesome digital nature, and then in turn hopefully want to save nature with all the problems going on in the world. So it's, yeah, for me it's about making you walk away with something and not necessarily feeding you educational snippets.
Got it. You don't have anything to add?
Sure. So to me, an educational experience is anything where, as Sigmund mentioned, where you walk away with something. I would say, for my personal definition, anything where I walk away with more knowledge than I had walking in. So it doesn't have to necessarily be like a classroom style environment in the game. It could be a tycoon game that teaches you about financial trade-offs, or it could be a safari game that teaches you about ecosystem. And these things don't even have to have any educational focus, but they still have educational value. And to me, that makes them an educational game.
Yeah, those are great answers. Yeah, the definition that I found and kind of liked a lot was an educational game is a game that aspires to change its players in specific and lasting ways. And in this one, there's like a little bit more of an emphasis on like intentionality and like the game being specifically designed to have that impact. But like as Zach said, yeah, there are plenty of experiences that are educational that actually weren't designed with that intent that are still valid. Yeah.
Thank y'all. Very thorough definitions. So I'm curious then, what makes educational games different from other games that you might find on Roblox?
I think that a lot of games on Roblox are educational to some degree. But I think what really sets apart games that are designed with education in mind is the quality and quantity of educational value. Like if a tycoon game isn't designed with that in mind, it will have some, but you could have a lot and it could be really polished.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. I like to like think about it in terms of goals too. Like, yeah, a lot of games on Roblox might have goals for players having an enjoyable experience or being engaged or creating a lot of traffic or revenue. But yeah, educational goals just kind of add another item to that list that can coexist alongside all of those other goals, pretty easily. So.
Yeah, I think they said it very well. Another thing I'd like to point out to kind of build on Zach's point that every game sort of is educational is that you get social interactions and collaboration and things like that in almost every game on Roblox because it is multiplayer enabled. And that's, I think, a pretty fundamental skill set that you don't really think of as educational, but it makes you grow as a person just playing with other people and interacting online.
Yeah, very true, especially, people that you might not ever interact with otherwise, right? Cool. So what motivated all of you to get into educational games in particular? I mean, I think Colin, we heard a little bit from you already, but.
So for me, when I was learning, I was doing it myself online, and it was a bit of an uphill climb. There were definitely resources out there, and they were very good, but they were not all like cohesive, and they were kind of scattered. And so I, scribbled down in my side projects document, to make a one-stop shop for programming knowledge. And it's one of those things where you say you're going to do it, but it takes you a long time to get to it. But then in late 2017, early 2018, there was these games on Roblox that were called like developer schools or stuff like that were paid access. And when you would buy it and get in, it would be like screenshots of the wiki uploaded onto a part in a base plate, and they wouldn't actually be offering you anything. But it showed that there was a lot of people out there who really did want to learn and looked for Roblox games to do that. And it really bothered me that people were taking advantage of that. So I decided to make a free alternative so that nobody would ever have to pay for those scam resources again. And that's what got me up to actually make my side project into my main project.
So awesome. I love that story.
Yeah, love that. Thank you so much for increasing the quality of educational content and making it freely available for everyone. Sigmund, I believe that we have some images to show.
Yeah, so we of course wanted to provide a digital playing ground for people to explore nature, but we also wanted to give a positive message and kind of share the greatness and epicness of nature through positive experiences. And we thought, where to better hit the people we want to hit, which are kids and teens, than on Roblox. So that's kind of what inspired us to make this. And a testament to all of that is that we've done 2 campaigns through our game so far, where, as I mentioned previously, 50% of our profits actually go back to conservation. So in April last year, we raised, or our community through in-game interactions actually raised $10,000, which we used to quote unquote adopt a black rhino in Borana Conservancy in Kenya, which I actually came back home from today after 27 hours of travel. And the amazing story here is that the community did everything, like in-game interactions converted to real money being set aside from our profit pool. And we adopted this rhino and we let the community name her. And the final name that was decided upon was Hope. And we also like to think, that's the hope for the future. And she was our very first, successful project, and just the first of many to come. And then we have the next picture, which was the latest campaign we had, which was for Eastern lowland gorillas in Congo, where we raised about $7,500 towards safety and medicine and rangers and things they need to protect these primates. And that was also just the community playing or people donating through our in-game options and so on. So I think for our sake, it's not only about giving people something more or knowledge or inspiration, but it's also about making that actual change. So our entire mission is based around these things.
Wow, that is super inspiring. How do you go about choosing what campaigns you want to do next?
For now, it's been like we have an awesome conservation partner called WildArk, which has been a nonprofit in the conservation space since 2016, I think. And some of our founders for Untamed Planet actually also founded WildArk. So it's a very tight relationship, and they have a lot of connections and experiences from around the world doing this work for many years. So up until this point, it's been them choosing, sort of the the best causes. But what we want to do is to sort of decentralize that so that the community can start choosing, and the community can, based on in-game events and interactions and everything, can decide where money actually ends up. So, but that's on the horizon.
Awesome. Well, I also want to thank you for joining us today after 27 hours of travel. So,
oh, absolutely. Wouldn't be anywhere else, but it's bedtime after this.
So I'd like to switch gears a little bit. And now that we have a good understanding of what your games are and why you do what you do, maybe talk a little bit about actually the process of developing these games. So, when you sit down to design your experience, what are your goals? And actually, I think we do have another image from Untamed Animals.
Yeah, so I can start it off. Two primary goals for us was to inspire or spark the curiosity of people. And we wanted to do that through creating, aesthetically pleasing environments like this one Jenny has created. This is our Taiga forest. Yeah, so that was one of the motivations, kind of beautiful aesthetics, cool gameplay, good experiences, etc., etc. And the other one is obviously, as I talked a lot about, raising money for or creating a revenue funnel for nature, essentially. So that meant we have to think revenue as one of the sort of primary goals in this, not just a good message, but actually also making money for this. And it's been a lot back and forth. We'll talk more about that later, I think. But yeah, those two were our main things.
Very worthy goals. All right. Anybody else want to talk about their goals for their experiences?
Yeah, sure. So for Lua Learning, my primary goal was to make sure that it was all interactive, because personally, I don't learn very well when I'm just reading an article, because I find it difficult to stick. So like, while I'll get the information and use it, I'll have to read that article like 5 times. Every time I have to do the thing, I have to look up the article again because it didn't stick. So with Lua Learning, the focus was on making sure that the users are actually putting that knowledge into practice to help it be retained. So when they learn about a new programming concept, they then have to use that in a lesson where you can't advance to the next lesson until you've used it to prove that you understand it and can now move forward with that in your tool belt. Yeah, so here in this video, you'll see how there's instructions for you to read, and then you write code in the IDE and run that and to complete the lesson and move on. So we were trying to get everything to stick, and we were also trying to make it engaging and not overwhelming or boring. So it's broken down into very small chunks so that at no point you're like, oh my God, this is so much, I can't do this. It's individual little pieces that you work your way through, but by the time you finish the chapter, you're like, wow, I did a whole lot.
This is amazing, dude.
Thank you.
Very cool. Awesome. All right. And then I believe, Colin, that we have an image as well from Roboco Sports League. You want to talk about some of the concepts you're trying to teach here?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll just give a quick overview of the high level goals and then kind of discuss some of the learning objectives, which are depicted here. But yeah, the main goal for the project and for its parent game, Roboco, is to make robotics more affordable, accessible, scalable, and fun. And I was kind of experiencing this personally just the other week. I've got a physical robotics kit that's kind of sitting next to my desk, and I really wish I could pull it out and use it more, but it's so difficult to make time for that outside of work hours. And yeah, so the hope is that having a digital version to practice robotics makes that easier for a lot of people. We also wanted to kind of create a multiplayer Roboco, because that was one of the wish list items that team had, was wouldn't it be great if more than one person could build a robot and have them interact and play in the same space together. So there was that. And then thirdly, one of the stakeholders on the project is an organization called First Robotics. And so kind of a third goal for the project is to capture the spirit and impact of live in-person first robotics events and kind of create a digital analog of those events, and eventually hold digital robotics competitions in the RSL experience.
Love that so much. I was a First Robotics 97 participant and such a huge impact. It's really great to see that program still going, and then also like reaching into the digital so it's even more accessible. It's awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. I really wish I had discovered First earlier. Yeah, and then anyway, like getting a little bit more specific about the objectives. So on this slide, on the left side, we have the engineering design process, which is like the real process that mechanical engineers use to develop products. And then on the right is the kind of core gameplay loop of the game. And you can see that we've kind of tried to model that very closely on the engineering design process so that as players are playing, they may or may not know it, but they're really practicing a lot of those same skills. And if they're also engaging with like more traditional engineering educational content, they'll find that those skills are transferable and that playing the game has kind of helped prepare them, increase their comfort level for real engineering problems.
Very, very cool. It's neat to see that translated into your mechanics as well. So awesome. All right. So how do you feel about how these concepts are kind of taught traditionally, and what about games makes it maybe possibly an even better way of teaching some of these concepts?
So I guess that kind of ties in with what I've been trying to do with Lua Learning, where by gamifying things and making them as interactive as I can, it really helps with knowledge retention and internalizing it, where interacting with the content and using it really helps you remember it and understand it a little better. Like there are a lot of ways to do that, and some ways of interaction work better than others for comprehension, because interacting helps with retention, like you'll remember that information, but like different ways of using it can really help you understand how and why it is that way, and that's very valuable, and definitely the goal of Lua Learning.
Yeah, I've often found too that like Zach said, the interaction is really the moment that the knowledge starts to stick and become concrete. And yeah, that's a huge strength of game-based learning strategies.
Especially,
oh, sorry.
Sorry, Sigmund. Go.
No, finish your sentence too, Colin, first.
I was gonna say, especially these topics that are so hands-on anyway, like engineering, like programming, it does make sense, I think, just intuitively to say, learning by doing, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And we've tried a couple of different things in our game as well. In the beginning of our game, we had these fact pop-ups that would actually come every now and then, and some people appreciate that. But what we realized was that it felt more like a nuisance and kind of intrusive, and we don't think the learning was a lot really like the learning potential from it, because yeah, you ate food and you saw, or you tried to eat food and you couldn't eat that, so it would say, yuck, this animal is not is a herbivore, So what we ended up figuring out more was indeed the interaction where, for example, we have pollution or like litter spawning around the world. And sometime last year, I had a class actually live in the game, just playing around and learning about animals. And I was there sort of as a co-lecturer on what we're doing and that kind of stuff. And one of the challenges we did then was for them to just run around for 10 minutes and collect trash and recycle it in game. And we said nothing about anything like fact-wise or how recycling works or what can and can't be recycled, but just by trying to recycle different things, they understood like plastic and metal can be recycled, but you don't really recycle branches, for example. So that was like a prime example of that interaction where the player just by doing actually learns the patterns and starts seeing the real life equivalent.
I think that also shows another great strength of game-based learning is that as the developer, you get to have this like fast iterative design process where you get to improve your game continually. So you saw that that wasn't working and you pivoted to a better process.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's such a great point. You know, you print textbooks and those are in place for potentially years. And yeah, you guys can actually update new information and better ways of teaching. It's awesome. So those concepts that you're teaching, we saw a little bit about this from Colin, but how do you actually translate those into game mechanics? Like how do you go from this topic that I want to teach to here's actually how the player interacts with it in the game?
So for Lua Learning, the lessons video that you saw earlier, that's kind of how it is because for working with code, the way to do that is by working with code. That was a pretty straightforward design. But later on, I'll show you some of the less straightforward designs where I worked the other way around. But in general, like I was trying to teach programming concepts like functions and loops and if statements. And those are the kinds of things where the way to do it is have the user write them and do so in an engaging way.
Yeah, for us, it was in the beginning, we had education as maybe one or the top focus or one of the top focuses. So we tried to just put it all in where we could. And that turned out to be not as efficient as we wanted. So we didn't have that many like deeper thoughts and discussions on the why we're trying to do it. So what we actually ended up having to do was to change it around so that it wasn't an education first game, because we realized we weren't really hitting or teaching anything to anyone, because if you don't have players and they're not engaged in your game, you get nowhere. So that took us a while actually to kind of figure out this process, and we're also not super great in the process today, but we have a bit more of okay, if there's something specific we want to sort of convey here, how can we build that into already engaging mechanics? So kind of just a shift in focus on our end, and also just the first time making an educational game for all of us. So, you know, it's a lot of tripping and falling and trying and and getting better.
Well, yeah, as Zach said, that is the wonderful thing about a live game, is that you can keep iterating on it, you can keep evolving. Awesome. Yeah, definitely excited to see those changes that you mentioned that are coming. And Colin, I think we had an image for you for this one as well.
Oh yeah, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess for ourselves specifically, it was fairly easy because we did have the original Roboco to kind of lean on, and they kind of provided us with the basic shape of the game that we could just copy essentially. I did want to take this opportunity to just kind of describe like Filament's like overall strategy for doing this, because we have to do this on a lot of projects. So we kind of have figured out some ways that it often goes and can go well. So this slide is kind of showing some general shapes that your learning objectives can kind of fit into. So you could look for learning objectives that kind of lend themselves to a gameplay verb. Like for RSL, maybe it's like connecting two blocks so that you can form a larger, more complex structure. Often we can look for objectives that kind of speak to a certain empowered identity, like wanting kids to be able to see themselves in a certain profession. And yeah, kind of intuit that is something that could be in their future. That's another common goal for educational games. And then thirdly, this is the one that RSL really leans into, is interactive systems. And this is one that I think games are particularly well suited for, is presenting complex systems with a lot of moving parts and illustrating how those parts fit together and affect each other and create diverse outcomes in a way that if you were trying to teach it with any other medium, it just really wouldn't really work. So yeah, 3 different ways that learning objectives can kind of be boiled down into game mechanics.
How does the platform affect those choices? I think you mentioned that Roboco is based on an off Roblox game. How's that translation process gone? Like, what's different about it now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, Roboco is a desktop and VR application. So they were definitely able to kind of set up a more complex interface in those environments than we are really able to in Roblox, especially because we're like goes without saying that we're targeting mobile as one of our platforms. So we did need to find ways to simplify the building tools that the player has available to them, while still making sure that there was enough like possibility space in the building that players could be expressive.
I think you mentioned also that it's multiplayer now.
Yes.
A lot of kind of social sort of opportunities there for learning as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And engagement, just a huge advantage that we're so psyched to be on Roblox for that reason.
All right, so we talked about translating learning concepts into game mechanics, but Zach, I think that you had said something about doing that in reverse.
Yeah, so I wanted to design a really engaging mechanic first, and then figure out how to translate that into educational value. If we could pull up the video clip for this one. I designed this system where you can write code that moves around your Roblox avatar on a board. And with this, we can do all sorts of interesting concepts. We can have the board filled with obstacles or things to interact with. And it's a really good problem space because it's a lot of the same things that you'll do as you're developing a game, with like character controls and interactions. So with this, you get to really introduce a lot of concepts that are not just programming specific, but also like general game development concepts in a fun and interactive way, because the user gets to see their personal avatar and they get to, see things moving around. It's not just, writing print statements, but you're getting action on your screen. And as you see here, when I run the code, it actually highlights the line that's currently executing. So it helps the users understand the flow of their code and how this function translates into moving in a square of n side length. So yeah, this was a mechanic that I developed first. And then from there, you design the puzzles and the boards that teach and incentivize new concepts.
That is really fabulous and highly interactive, like you said. How quickly did you get to that particular iteration? Did it take a lot of thinking through it? Did you add the highlighting immediately, or is that something that you hit on later?
So I got a rough prototype up and running in a weekend, just to see if it was something that was something possible. And once I proved that it was, I spent a couple of weeks like refining the idea, and just figuring out what's a good way to go about implementing this concept. So there's like the global functions, move forward and turn right, turn left, and stuff like that. So getting to that design point took a while. And in terms of the highlighting the executing line, that was something I actually developed kind of separately, because that's not part of this mechanic. It's part of my in-game code editor as a whole, because it's useful in lessons and quests. Those are the two sections that I've shown so far. and they each needed that. Not well, I wouldn't say need. They both benefit from that dramatically, and so I developed that in parallel. I would say, like while working on quests, I was also working on improving the code editor. And yeah, so once I just integrated with that, you get this completed system that really has a lot of educational value of all these components working together.
That's awesome. All right, so kind of moving on a little bit. Throughout your experience of developing educational games, what are some kind of pitfalls that you've encountered for anybody?
Yeah, I can. I mentioned it on the previous question, but in the beginning we had these. I think we have an image here. We had these fact pop-ups, which we thought were really a cool touch, but they ended up just being annoying, and they blocked your movement and everything. Like the implementation could probably have been far better as well and less intrusive, but as a concept, we thought it would add value, and it kind of didn't feel like it did. So it was a matter of not having a clear enough understanding internally of who and how we wanted to reach the players. And so we just tried to reach all the age groups at once with like a super general educational feature, you know. And yeah, it's it didn't, for the majority of players, it didn't play the right way.
So that required some iteration as well.
Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned like all the age groups. What is your core audience that you're aiming for?
Yeah, good question. We're a little bit in the redefinition stage of that, because previously we've been like, yeah, anyone under 18, which is a broad group. But the fun thing is checking our stats. Our two biggest groups are 6- and 18+. So it's 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 right now we're kind of hitting everyone and no one. And I think for this update, we're kind of trying to hit, 11 to 15, for example. But it'll be interesting to see when the update launches just in about 2 weeks, if that's the fact, if we're actually hitting those people.
What was the impetus for that kind of redesign, that change that you're doing?
No, it's the majority of the decision came from as always being blocked by having all gameplay elements have to work in a multiplayer setting with several people playing. Everyone should understand what to do, which kind of just ended being a pitfall for all our game design, because we felt restricted, and the discussions for getting features, from an idea stage to an actual implementation stage took so long, because we kept just going a little bit in circles, how to implement objectives that the entire age range can understand, and it's also a social aspect of it, blah blah blah. So for this update, we actually thought more, okay, but let's make this game great for a single player, but in a multiplayer world, so we hope that further down we can actually appeal to the more multiplayer aspects of the game. But for now we're focusing on making it fun and engaging, and hopefully a little bit educational for the individual player first. And that makes it a lot easier to work through, because you don't have to have all these, okay, but how do 40 people play this exact feature at once? Because we have 100-player servers, and yeah, it's
a lot of variables to take into account.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's kind of a general question, like how different is it to try to teach different demographics, different age groups? Like, what are the considerations to take into account? Colin, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, I can speak to RSL a little bit. So we kind of have 3 target audiences that we're kind of designing for. First one is just kind of your standard Roblox player between the ages of 10 and 14. So I guess maybe a little older than your average, but yeah, so that's kind of like the first group we're going for. in these early stages at least. And then we also want to target the first community members and make sure we're creating something that kind of fits in with the programs that First already has and feels like a natural extension of those. And then ultimately, it would be great to create features that are designed specifically for educators and students. And that's kind of like a long-term vision. And yeah, there's definitely different considerations that we need to take into account for each of those demographics. I think for Roblox players, the fact that it's a Roblox game means certain things, yeah, that may or may not be common in the industry at large. So avatars, multiplayer, a lot of the interactions being in the environment, things of that nature. And then the first community has a lot of kind of knowledge, like subject matter knowledge that they're taking into the experience. So that's going to, yeah, kind of mold the shape that the experience takes as we kind of get more into that demographic. Yeah, and then students and teachers really need something that fits oftentimes within a class period, and also is accessible on the devices that they have available to them, which is often like Chromebooks. So yeah, another reason that we're excited that we're working in Roblox.
We're excited to have you too. All right, so that kind of ties into what are some of the best practices that you all have found for teaching in games for your various audiences?
So I found that there's no like global answer to this. It's really just a process of refinement for whatever your specific content is. There's like some rules of thumb that I found to be really useful. My favorite is always let the player conclude. Never give them the whole thing. Even if you give them 95% of it, they should reach the last 5% on their own, because not only does it help them remember it, but also gives them like a good feeling of satisfaction, like they did it, and that motivates them and has them continue and be engaged. So you want to make it a game where they have to like complete it rather than a lecture, and let them feel that achievement when they reach the end. While I have the floor, by the way, I want to hop back to a previous question about the pitfalls, because this is something I do still struggle with. So if anybody has ideas out there, shoot me a message somewhere. I find it really hard to help them when they're struggling, right? If your content isn't enough for them and they're still struggling, I find it really difficult to aid them once that's happening. Like if you're a teacher in a classroom, you can see your students struggling and adapt and deal with it. But as a game developer, you have your content and that's out there. And so what I have been trying to do is like you have hints that you can optionally open up if you're struggling, and it, if you get it wrong, it gives you some words of encouragement and tries to get you to keep going. But it's not the same as having a teacher who's in front of you, seeing what your issue is and responding. So I'd love to hear if anybody has any thoughts on how best to handle struggling students in a static environment.
Yeah, actually, this is like a super good segue into a case study I was going to show from a game I've worked on in the past. Yeah, do you guys have that slide?
Let's see. Yes, I think that's slide 13, Dan.
Yeah,
right?
so yeah, that's the one. And yeah, this is super relevant to what Zach was saying too about kind of wanting to get players at most 90% of the way there, but always leaving that last 10% for them. So this is a game. This game is called Court Quest, and it's about teaching elementary and middle schoolers kind of the US court system. And so you're actually a bus driver in this game, and you're picking up passengers and dropping them off at the correct courts that they need to go to. So it's kind of a matching game. And there are really 3 skills that players will need to be successful in this game. There is reading comprehension, logical reasoning, and also court system knowledge. And I brought this screenshot along because I think it does a good job illustrating kind of what Zach said, where we have some mechanics that are specifically designed to support learners who may be struggling with any of those aspects. So for reading comprehension, we've included a glossary system where some of the words that are a little bit higher level, you can click on them and then read a definition right as you're going through the experience. And then this piece at the bottom, this character is actually one of the passengers on your bus, and you can get help from her anytime you're not sure where a passenger should go. And she'll kind of help you model the thought process that you need to go through to figure it out, but she won't tell you the answer. She'll just kind of ask you questions that help model that decision process. And it's still up to the player to actually make the decision. And then finally, for the court system knowledge, it's not actually shown here, but if you click the question mark, it brings up this flow chart showing all the courts in the game and roughly how they're arranged. So the players can kind of follow the passenger's progress, starting at the lower level courts and moving to the circuit court and the Court of Appeals and the state Supreme Court, et cetera. So it's like the player is getting an intuitive sense for how things are structured while they're playing. And then as soon as they see that flow chart, it really clicks and they're like, oh, that makes sense. So yeah, different ways to support players who are struggling with different aspects of the experience.
That's really fascinating. We've got a lot of really neat things going on there. Thinking about Sigmund's problem with pop-ups or kind of disrupting the flow of the game. And, if you have players who aren't struggling, having those additional hints there unnecessarily would be really disruptive. But, this way is very much more supportive. Like if you need it, it's here, it sounds like.
I'm definitely gonna take that glossary idea. I think that's really useful. Makes it much easier to catch up on information if you forgot it or didn't, or you skipped that lesson for whatever reason. So yeah, that's a really good idea. Thank you.
I have another thing as well is if I teach anyone anything and they struggle, of course, then I'm more in this teacher role than your game kind of doing it. But having visual analogies, kind of explaining the same concept, but with something they're common with, I find to be a very good way to kind of inform a concept or something for them. So, if it's too hard for them to understand loops, in your case, for example, maybe there's a real world example that could be one of the hints, with a small illustration or something. John has 3 apples and whatever, cuts them X amount of times, how many, so kind of making the playing field to where they are familiar, I think is a good way to do it. But how you would do that in your case, I don't know.
Yeah, I do like to do that a lot. So like if I'm explaining how tables work in Lua, I would talk about like a filing cabinet where there's all these different drawers full of things. And that does definitely help a lot. But if they're not getting it even with that, I've been toying with ideas of like making the lessons adapt. Like if you get it wrong, then the instructions change to a simpler version. But that means that the amount of writing I have to do exponentially increases. So I'm trying to avoid that because it's not just a laziness thing, it's a development time and cost. There's like, considerations and just how much writing I have to do.
Maybe you could also just pop up, hey, it looks like maybe you want to review the if statement lesson or something like that, and give them the opportunity to maybe go back and try that lesson again, maybe refresh themselves, because might have been some time between lessons, you never know. But
Right.
Yeah, without having to write a new lesson, maybe give an opportunity for that.
Speaking of never know, later I will talk about how I do know.
Excellent. All right. Yep. Okay. And then I think for best practices, we also have an image on slide 12 for Untamed Animals.
Yeah, this actually is an update that never shipped, but I just love the visual aspect here. So we were making this for a campaign, which we might still do someday, where we were gonna plant 100,000 trees in Australia, and based on player interaction in game, that we would count upwards towards that. So then we were going to implement tree planting in general, like farming in the game. And while it's, you know, a simple mechanic, it's also good to just onboard people into it. And there's a lot of ways we can do that. And some of them are, you know, doing it through a series of text boxes and stuff like that, kind of explaining the process. But what I like to do is to like clearly visualize the steps that they need to go through, because if they see that and they kind of understand which step on the 2D represents the 3D step, then, you know, they actually figure it out themselves without having to review the entire process. So and yeah, so that's one of the ways you can kind of implement things like that. The other way we like to do, which is what a lot of this current new update is about, is creating emotional or sentimental bonds and connections between the player and whatever they're doing. So for example, here, where a lot of the update is about caring for and rescuing, adopting animals, and, you know, training them up so they can go back into the wild, it's actually all about creating that connection between the player and the animal, so they start caring for it for real.
Very cool. Very cool. And then hopefully, you know, take that love and get involved, you know, through maybe the charitable giving that you do in your own game. Maybe, you know, they introduce some of that into their own lives as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. All right. So what are some of the mechanics or methods that you use for assessing whether your players are learning? I think, Zach, you were touching on this. You know, how do you know that your players are getting the things that you want them to learn?
So this is where I alluded to earlier about, I do know the last time you looked at that lesson, because I have a lot of analytics. So it's exposed to the user in a sense where, like, the last lesson you used is marked for you so that you can pick up right where you left off. But it also helps me know, like, how long has it been since you last looked at if statements. And I also, I have a slide for this where I have analytics based on, like, what device you're on, where you're spending your time. So I know that, like, I can see here that my users mostly focus on tutorials, so maybe I should polish that. Or I see that there's not a lot of time spent in the multiplayer section. Maybe I need to rework that. And I have analytics not just for, like, where they're spending their time, but how they're spending their time. I know, like, per lesson, what the failure rates are. How many tries does it take on average for a user to get through this lesson? Is it too difficult? Do I need to break it up? Do I need to explain this better? How many lessons do people do on average before they end their session? You know, how is it too tiring? Are they not able to get through a lot before they give up? Where do people leave off? Are they often leaving off at this one because it's, like, too difficult and they get demotivated? So having analytics for everything is so valuable. Like, we talked about how the iterative design process is so useful. You can't do that if you don't know what's going on in your game. You don't have the insight to see, where do I need to iterate? What do I need to change? Having, like, detailed, in-depth analytics for every little thing has been a game changer for me. And I track basically everything that I can think of that might be useful. And it's been fantastic in making sure that my content is the best that it can be.
Nice. So do you have an example of how you've gotten that data and then acted on it?
Yeah, so certain lessons I found were, like, had really high failure rates. Like, everybody was getting it wrong first try. And I was like, that's not right. Like, I didn't explain this concept well enough, so I reworded it and used actually, like we talked about earlier, I used, like, real world metaphors, and from there the failure rates went down, and I was like, okay, fantastic, you know, people are starting to get this a little better.
Man, that's so cool to be able to actually see that change. Yeah, that's awesome.
Really is. So speaking of analytics, do you have any goals outside of education in terms of key performance indicators, tracking engagement, things like that? Like, what else are you looking at?
So I'm a little bit weird, and I just really like performance optimizations. I think they're really fun and cool. I actually got a Roblox game to run at over 7,000 frames per second, which is just ridiculous and unnecessary. But Lua Learning runs at almost 2,000 frames per second on my device. And while that's obviously overkill, what that means is that like you could pick up an iPhone 5S with this much memory inside of it and it'll still run beautifully, which ties into Lua Learning's accessibility arc, where we want it to be in the hands of as many people as possible. And so making sure that anybody can run it on anything has been a real big part of that. So I have metrics on performance, on like how it's running, how much memory it uses, and all of those little nitty gritty details that help me figure out where I'm spending resources and where I need to do better. I think it's in a pretty good place by now, though. Pretty satisfied.
Very cool.
2,000 frames.
Yeah. Anybody else have analytics that you are tracking?
Yeah, we have analytics for people engaging in our more conservational stuff and like the specific features set up to convert to real life impact. But I reckon like we can definitely be better at using analytics for all these things. We have all the standard things tracking and what kind of animals are people spending the most time playing as, and so on and so on. But we're actually not using that so much to inform our decisions. So with this pet update, at least I have a lot of that in mind and wanting to add a lot of analytics to the game and to these new features so that we understand how and why not players interact with the game as they do. And then it could be simple things as, is there a favorite pet that they can adopt? And, are there particular activities they spend more time on? Are there particular activities they don't like doing, and then you can do A/B testing a lot of stuff as well, to show different things to different players, even on onboarding, force onboarding on some people and let others people choose, for example, and see if the retention is higher for one group or the other. So it's not necessarily educational focus, but it's very interesting ways to use analytics to improve your experience overall. And I also second what Zach said about performance. We also want our game to be performant on every device. So we have a lot of that in mind when we're making new meshes and assets and everything, but also on the programming end of things, making sure we're actually not using more network requests than needed, or stuff like that.
Very cool. Thank you, guys. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to part 1 of our Educational Games Roundtable. Check back next week for part 2, where we'll share our panelists' responses to the audience Q&A questions. See you then.